we are now going to move on to our panel. So thank you so much, Finnegan.
Thank you.
Great. So Finnegan really set the stage for why we should be interested in increasing the number of neurodivergent employees and the supports for neurodivergent employees in our organization. What we often see when we get to this point is a feeling of, I want to get more involved, or I want to do more, now what? So what we hope to accomplish with this panel is insight into some of the practical considerations that accompany getting started or moving forward with neurodivergent inclusion from that employer perspective. So I'll be moderating this panel along with Craig Single, who is on our board and has a plethora of experience in neurodiversity programs and hiring in different capacities. So really happy to have you here, Craig. And hopefully, yeah, I think we have everybody pinned up here, which is great. So Craig, if you want to kick us off, I would love to get started on this panel.
Definitely. Thanks, Cait. And thank you, panelists, for joining. Instead of reading your bios for you, I'll just ask that you share with us a quick introduction and explain a little bit about your work or your interest in neurodiversity. And I'll just call you out to make it easy. So Joe, do you want to start?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Riddle. I'm the director of Neurodiversity in the Workplace, which is a nonprofit program that exists to help a lot of our corporate partners to create better ways to bring in neurodivergent talent. And so we've worked for a while now. We've got our start in about 2013 with SAP's Autism at Work program. Some of our partners include Dell and Bank of America. And I see a lot of our friends online here. So hello, everyone. I'm very glad to join.
Thanks, Joe. Kirsten, you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kirsten. I am the administrator of scientific programs and inclusion initiatives with Eagles Autism Foundation. So my main role is in the inclusion space with ensuring that all of our Eagles events are accessible and inclusive for fans and guests that are coming to the stadium, whether that's for a football game or a Halloween party, and also assisting our game day staff we have some neurodiverse game day staff, which I can get into a little bit, and excited to grow.
Thanks, Kirsten. We're going in alphabetical order. So Krista.
Hi, everyone. My name is Krista DuGuffroy. I work at Vanguard Investments I work at Vanguard as a senior diversity recruiting consultant. What I'm aligned to here is really looking at our mid-level and our MBA talent and making sure that there's both inclusion and equity in the process. But I know a lot of you from my previous work at SEI Investments. I knew the investments was coming from somewhere, where I ran our inclusion efforts for about 7 years and led our Neurodiversity at Work initiative. So really excited to see some old friends and new friends, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Krista. And last but not least, Linda.
Hi, Linda Behmke. I'm with Quest Diagnostics. My day job at Quest is in human resources, but I'm here because I lead our Diverse Abilities Employee Business Network, same as an employee resource group for many of you. And we started back in 2017 and with an autism hiring initiative around labs around the country, and have expanded in other ways since, but that's my main involvement here.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here and welcome. We have some questions that we've come up with, and we're going to throw those out there. Everyone else that's participating, if you want to put questions in the chat, either in the Zoom chat or in the other chat that we had put out in the link, we'll try to get to some of those. So the first question we had, I think, is pretty interesting based on Finnegan's presentation, that it started to come up. So Krista and Joe, I'm going to throw these to you first around ADA and legality. So can you speak a little bit about disclosure and accommodations? And Krista, maybe we'll start with you. And can you frame how can we frame that conversation around disclosure and identity in talent acquisition?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have this conversation a lot, and I have this conversation with different audiences. If I'm talking to a job seeker who may be looking at an application for the first time, sometimes they see that question, do you have a disability? And there's a nervousness. So one thing I try to explain really quickly is that some organizations are required by law to ask the question. You are not required to answer. So if they are an affirmative action employer, they are required to ask the question. But the flip side of that is there's usually about 1 to 2 people in the entire organization that will see your answer. So that means your recruiter will not likely see it. The hiring manager will not likely see it. So you have a choice to disclose on the application, but then to also verbally disclose if you want that to be known as part of your hiring process. Finnegan made some amazing points, right? We want people to like us for our whole self and not feel like we have to hide some of those aspects about ourselves. So I encourage you that if you are comfortable to share that, but that is a personal choice, which leads me to the other side of the conversation that I have a lot with recruiters or hiring managers. If someone has been brave enough to share with you their disclosure, their accommodations, what they might need to be successful, they put a lot of trust in you. That's a social risk that we take disclosing that. And that is a trust that you and that individual have and not anyone else. So if someone does disclose to you, the equitable thing, the right thing, the just thing is not to then go and disclose that to other people. That is their personal choice and only a choice that they can make. So while you think that you might be, sharing something or trying to make someone's life a bit easier by taking away that burden of the conversation, that is not a choice that you have. And that's not something we want to remove from somebody else's decision-making.
Great, thanks, Krista. Joe, what about you've worked with a lot of different companies? What are some legal aspects that you think companies should know around inclusive hiring?
Yeah, well, and first, Krista, great way to phrase that to job seekers and to companies. I think that looking at the accommodations process and even just the word accommodations can be really scary for people. And really, we like to try and repaint this word in a better picture. It's really just a tool that's needed to do your job better, right? And so the ADA by law is mandated to provide these tools. They'll call it an accommodation for all of their employees who request one, but also in hiring and recruiting. And that's something that a lot of companies don't always understand, that the ADA applies to that hiring and recruiting phase of employment. So we encourage people to figure out what accommodations they would like, what tools they would need to do better, to have more success in the interview. And this is where we run into a lot of barriers, because oftentimes people who are new to the workforce, you might not understand what tool you need to be successful because you haven't really done it too many times successfully. And so this is where we're encouraging our company partners to say what those accommodations are, what those tools are that are available to people. If you're a career professional in a corporation right now, go to your careers page and look at where you would request an accommodation. Oftentimes it's a very small, in the fine print, little email address that has no direction other than, if you need an accommodation, please email blah, 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 blah. But what we're encouraging is to make some better suggestions for what those tools could be that would allow people to succeed. It's kind of a chicken egg thing. If you want people to disclose, and if you're a neurodivergent person and you want to disclose, there's really not a whole lot of incentive to do that unless you know what the tools are that you would get by disclosing, because there's a lot of trauma that comes from disclosure traditionally. And so we want to encourage companies to look at that process as you were a neurodivergent job seeker and say, okay, what do I need to go through? Give them an example of the process, show the tools that you could provide to be able to better access that. And this all falls under a reasonable accommodation in the hiring process through the ADA. So that's hopefully answers your question a little bit, Craig.
Perfect, thank you.
Absolutely. And Joe, I know you're not a lawyer by trade, but I do want to follow up because this is a question that we get often about, are there any legal concerns when it comes to this sort of maybe affirmative action type hiring that employers need to know about?
Yeah, I think that employers often get swept up in the legality of the word accommodation, of the whole ADA, and it's a really simple tool, the whole ADA, to allow companies to make sure that they're providing accommodations to people that are requested. But really the core of it is that communication with their applicants and the ability to make sure that applicants understand what's available to them. And the ADA also allows you to do things that people would typically think that are outside of what's allowed in a hiring process. It allows you to request an alteration of the interview process itself and to modify that, as long as it doesn't cause undue hardship. And undue hardship in a interview process is really hard to get to. You can change the process really easily with some minor adjustments that would benefit you. One example would be written questions in advance. Perfectly reasonable thing to be able to request by someone, and something that's really helpful for so many neurodivergent candidates. And Finnegan puts it in here, very stressful. What am I emailing when I mentioned that email? Provide a template to people. These are some of the best practices, and we're seeing companies start to do that. When we look specifically at the laws regarding the ADA, and again, that disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, but I think that when we look at those laws, what that law is trying to do is to bring people on an equal playing field. And so oftentimes employers have this myth that the interview process needs to be standardized and the exact same for every single person. And it should be altered when those accommodations are requested. And the ADA allows you to alter and, in a way, make the interview process more suitable to that candidate. And that's perfectly legal to do and to change within your organization. So hopefully that addresses your question a little bit, Cait.
Yeah, and Joe, I'll throw in one quick thing that others on the call may not realize is that, like my current employer, we use some assessments in the selection process, and those assessments are also compliant, where there are accommodations built into that assessment. But if a candidate never discloses or asks for that, we don't know to enable those accommodations in the assessment tool, which makes a difference. It makes a huge difference. So it depends on the company and their processes, of course, of how they've set them up. But that's a real example that I've made sure that since I've been here, we've enabled those accommodations. So but if we don't know, you can't offer them.
Right, and Craig, that's a great point, because when we look at the most commonly requested accommodation that we see, and we work with a lot of job seekers and companies to try and facilitate that process, we see a kind of lack of awareness of the possibilities of accommodation. The most commonly requested one is, well, in college or in high school, I got more time on tests, right? That's great, but how do we apply that into the interview process? Well, in your example here of assessments, it's easy to apply that. We can create maybe more time on those assessments. And that's a perfect example of some of the things we've done. Some companies will use software. Say, for example, you're hiring for a software developer, there's coding tests. You can elongate the time that people are allowed to spend on that test. Easy example. But then, best practice is to also provide other examples that you've done, like an altered interview, a job coach, or a career consultant in the interview process itself, those written questions in advance, or even just a simple diagram of what the interview process looks like. Not even really an accommodation, but again, a tool for people to understand this is what the roadmap looks like. I can lower my anxiety, and this is just good for all talent in general. All neurodiverse talent in general. So
absolutely, Joe. And Craig, I think you hit on something really interesting that I've talked about with Linda before. So when companies go to proactively seek out neurodivergent talent, there's several different ways that they can do this. And I want to kind of hit on some of those. But Linda, I want to hear about some of the initial steps you took at Quest when you were looking to be more inclusive of neurodivergent employees or employees with disabilities more broadly. I know that an assessment was a big part of that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first thing that we did was we made sure that we got business leaders buy-in to the concept, because you can't force someone into a job or force someone to hire something that they're not comfortable with. I mean, someone, a group of people they're not comfortable with. or they don't understand. And so that was really the first huge step. The next thing we did was a lot of training, both with hiring managers and with employees. Our hiring initiative, excuse me, initially was in a specific department within Quest. And so we trained individuals who were going to be working with the neurodivergent hires that we would make, so that they got over the assumptions and stigmas and preconceived notions that they had about what people can and can't do because of a disability. I will, give a shameless plug. We really did all of that with a consulting organization called James Emmett and Company. Some of you may know James or know of his work. He really helped start the whole disability inclusion movement at Walgreens many years ago. And so he was a huge help in helping us with educating, with connecting with organizations in each community where we were working. And in terms of, you were just talking, Joe, about the hiring, the hiring process and the interview process. We made some adjustments there. We also did an assessment. We quickly realized just was way too gray for most neurodivergent people to be able to comfortably express who they were by answering it, and realized additionally that it really did not add value. So folks that we brought in through that program were exempt from having to do that assessment to begin with, because all it was a frustration and not a value add. And then we added some training for hiring managers on the interview process. We do a lot of behavioral interviews, which again can be very gray. And so one of the things that we would do is, instead of saying, tell me about a time, we'd focus it a little bit more. It doesn't really impact the value, but so when you were at ABC or when you were in school, did you have a situation where this happened? Just rewording the question a little bit to make it easier for someone who thinks differently than the people who initially came up with those questions to be able to come up with an answer that would still give us the information that we're looking for, which was, how are you likely to behave? And so, little things like that, again, not alter the value, ultimately, which is what our business leaders were told on, is we're not going to just hire anyone. We're going to hire the right person. Hopefully, in many cases, that may be a person with a disability, but we're not going to hire someone just because they have a disability. We don't want to set them up to fail. We don't want to set the business up to fail. We just want to expand people's horizons to realize that a much broader group of individuals can do jobs than maybe what they thought before they were educated.
I love that concept. And I know several panelists have that same idea. It's about accessing talent and making that your process accessible to people to get that talent in order to do that. So thank you for sharing that, Linda.
Sure.
And Kirsten, I know you took a little bit of a different approach with the Eagles Autism Foundation. First, in that you work mostly with part-time jobs, which is awesome, game day jobs as a Philadelphia Eagles fan, but also that you didn't really have an official program when you were getting started. So can you talk a little bit about how you took steps toward more inclusive opportunities at a scale that really worked for you and your team?
Definitely. So we took a more streamlined approach just with, the number of game day staff and being a part-time job. We wanted to really make sure it was a focused program that we are able to build out and scale. So we, started with sending our application to our community grant recipients, which are in the Philadelphia area that have job seekers, neurodiverse job seekers. And I was kind of the liaison between an individual as well as the larger game day staff process. So there are, probably over 700 game day staff. So there's many, many people that it can be easy to get kind of lost in the shuffle and, lose sight of the goals of gaining that job. So with our job seekers and me being the liaison, I worked with them from, the interview process to ensure they had everything that they needed to still every day on their game day jobs, checking in with them, managing and training their supervisors, providing an extra schedule if they need it, and also finding the best role for them within our game day staff. So within Lincoln Financial Field, there's many jobs that an individual could have, whether it's ticket taking or concierge or, a greeting staff or helping with directions. So we trial it together if they, elect to have some extra support and find the best role for them. So if they try ticket taking and it's, not their forte, not their job, we can find a best fit for them, whether that's maybe on Head House Plaza where they're greeting fans or showing them up the stairs or the elevator. So we definitely took a more streamlined approach that seemed to be helpful for this past season.
That's great. I really appreciate just the wide variety of perspectives we have here to show that, inclusion can happen in many different ways.
Yeah, in speaking of happening in many different ways, there's a great question that came up in the chat, which actually basically mirrors what our question was going to be. So for all of you, jump in as you see fit. So obviously we've seen some successes up to this point, and some companies even in our area like Wawa and others have been doing it for many years. So kind of where do we go from here, and like what are those opportunities? The question specifically was how do we get into other industries like healthcare and finance and education, entertainment? So what are the things that we can be doing, building off these early successes and scale from here? So I throw that out to all four of you. Go ahead and jump in with your thoughts.
Yeah, I think we're seeing at Neurodiversity in the Workplace, we're seeing a huge expansion. The tech sector definitely led the charge in, creating the drive for this. In our early partnerships with SAP, we saw this just wonderful outreach happening. But now there's a lot of different areas in finance and healthcare and a lot of different areas that are now exploring neurodiversity or neurodivergence as a critical part of diversity and inclusion and of just general talent acquisition. And it's really encouraging to see. I think that what we're seeing is a redefining of these best practices because some of these big companies led the charge and saying, look, this is good for business, this is good for people, this is good for talent, and this is good to get more skills into your workforce. So it's really a critical business factor that we're preaching to the rest of the world. And so we're definitely seeing an increase, which is really wonderful to hear.
I would agree. I think one of the downsides in some ways of the financial and tech industries, nothing against anyone in those here personally, is that those jobs typically do require a college degree. Someone in the chat asked if we, if companies hire individuals with only a high school diploma, and I think that's a huge untapped market for the disability inclusion movement, because you're right, it did start with high tech and IT, and I think there's huge opportunities for everyone else to take advantage of folks they don't happen to be an IT person. I'm not an IT person either. A lot of us are not IT people or technical people. So I think it's somewhat just, we need to do it. And the more we raise the point that there are other organizations doing that, the more it'll happen.
With our game, sorry.
No, go right ahead, Kristen.
I was just going to say, with our game day staff, I think it's a unique opportunity. We also don't, require the degree, but we've seen individuals stay 10 plus years and really kind of rise up the ranks, although it is a part-time job, really find value in, gaining higher positions and changing jobs throughout, the many seasons that some of the individuals have been there. So I think, it is really important to sometimes move away from the tech space or the finance space like we're talking about and find, more creative jobs and solutions.
I would echo a lot of what our fellow panelists said. I do think it's interesting that maybe a few years ago, we could really segment out like tech roles, finance roles, marketing roles, HR roles, but now it's all really blended, right? Like I'm in HR, but I do a lot in data analytics and projecting and forecasting. I'm not a finance person. You would not want me to be a finance person, but I need those skills in my job to perform well. So I think for even individuals who might be going through, different boot camps or different, skill building opportunities, you might not be heading into a tech role, but don't be afraid to build upon those skills and transition into the industry of your choice. We're not going to get there without us all doing that together, but it definitely is not limited to technology anymore.
And I'll add one from my experiences, and Amanda, Radcliffe, was really the inspiration for what we did at Vertex when I was working there. That I partnered with Joe, and we created what, essentially what Kirsten is talking about at the Eagles. We created what we called a bridge job, and we were very transparent about it wasn't a full-time job. Our business had a really unique opportunity, and there was a great question in the chat about, the Great Resignation creating more opportunity. And it was not a full-time job. It was a great job, and the business needed it critically. And it gave an opportunity for individuals to create skills that then Krista took one to come over to SCI as a result of it. But that was a success to us. And it was 1 week a month, and the team that we brought in stayed. They just stayed. They never went away. And we converted some to full-time. One got a great job with SCI. And I think there's really great opportunity to not only think about a full-time job every single time. What are ways that we can enable the development of the skills that will help them get a job either at our own companies or elsewhere, and not be solely focused from a talent acquisition perspective of, I need to fill a job and how can I do that easily. It's how can you improve the opportunity for individuals and also bring neurodiversity into your organization at the same time.
This is really such a great conversation. I see the chat is just going off with questions and all of these things. So we will have one last question here with a few minutes, but I do want to point out that many people here on the panel and in our network in general are happy to share about these experiences or answer questions you might have. So if that's something you're interested in, please do get in contact with us, because we can only do so much in a 30-minute panel here. So to close us out, if you could give one piece of practical advice to employers who are interested in either hiring more neurodivergent talent and or creating more inclusive workplace environments for neurodivergent employees, what would it be? And that's for everyone.
I would say to stop waiting for perfection. You're never going to build out the perfect program, the perfect hiring practices, but focus on one thing at a time. And if it's creating a more equitable and inclusive hiring practice, the form that Finnegan shared earlier from Ultranauts, detailing out exactly what is to come in the interview process, that is an amazing step. But I think some employers fall into the trap where they want it to be perfect and have all the data and all the research and all the ROI. And unfortunately, that can prevent us from making equitable steps for our community.
Yeah, Krista, to go off of that, it's great advice. And I think that I would say if you build it, they will come. Talk about what you want to do for inclusion, talk about the accommodations that you have, so that you can invite people to join your organization and your talent. And it's really simple if you break it down like that. If you just expect neurodivergent inclusion without doing very much, you won't know who's neurodivergent within your organization, and two, you won't get access to really, really critical talent that you're overlooking through your interview process. So let them know what you want to do to adjust your interview process, your employment process in general, and people will come.
And just adding on to that, I think creating, a welcoming environment is really crucial, because, building something that's organic and not forced, I feel like has been a really important part of what the Eagles have done. We've had neurodivergent job seekers and job members on our team, long before we started with Eagles Autism Foundation. So, just creating an environment where people want to work and feel welcomed, and that their ideas and, you know, personalities are able to shine through their job. So I think that's one thing, is creating a specific environment.
So I guess the last one here, I would say yes, all of that. And I think, again, important to make sure that you build a business case that your business leaders will happily buy into. And a lot of that, I think Leslie had put in the chat about, you know, if you have some facts and data that you can give them on why this is going to help, that's going to help your case. And the more brought in your leaders, your supervisors, down to the supervisor and team member level are, the more successful you'll be long term.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for those insights. Joe, Kirsten, Krista, Linda, and Craig, thank you for joining us for this panel. It was great to have all of those different insights to share with everyone.